and Nick, if you'd just like to come down and take our lovely seats up here. And then hopefully we should be able to be joined by Eva live. Hello, Eva, can you hear us?
Wasn't expecting to have such a huge face on the audience, but it's lovely to be here with you all.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I'd like to welcome questions from people here, please. Anyone has any questions for our guests? Well, while we're thinking of...
I've got a question for Joe.
Oh, that's controversial coming from the board, yes.
Okay. I wanted to know, I was really interested in the user testing that you did with young people, and whether there are any particular challenges or like the logistics of that. How did you find people, like literally find them, and how did you do that testing? Because that sounds so interesting.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. So it's getting the right panel of children and making sure that we've got a diverse range of kids. And with Muse particularly being an awkward age group, as I mentioned, it's getting sort of the mix of younger and older skewing to provide what's going to be useful research and feedback for us. So I think the best one we worked with was Beano Brain, and the kids that they managed to source for us, and they were just really thorough and really engaged children, and it was great watching them as well, and they just really wanted to work. But of course, as I'm sure everyone knows, with user testing, sometimes people aren't that engaged, and that can be challenging, especially with children. Yeah. But yeah, Beano Brain were really good. Thank you.
Fantastic. I have a question from our online audiences as well, and it's for Eva, and the question is, thanks for your tips, but they missed tip 8. Could you please repeat it? This is a question for you now because it was pre-recorded, so can you remember what?
Oh, did I miss tip 8?
Someone didn't hear it.
Actually. I see. Let me just cycle through my presentation really quickly. I think tip number 8 was about, that was a slide where I shared some feedback from a screen reader tester. And tip 8 was around collect quotes that are really going to move the needle. What are the things that users are telling you in testing? Are there snippets of sort of videos and quotes that you can share with your stakeholders that are really going to make the penny drop? So that's tip number 8.
Super, thank you very much. I believe you have a question over there.
Hi. I was really interested in what Nick was saying, but I suppose the question for you, Nick, is do you worry about reliance on a single platform, not having your content on your website, not owning your content if YouTube decide to change what they promote or what the algorithms let you have? And it's really interesting comparing it to Muse, where you chose to build your own platform and website because you didn't want to rely on social media, partly because of the audience, but also because then you own the content and it's there.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a very good one, and you're absolutely right. There is massive risk, I think, in being so reliant on one platform. We've all seen that changes in ownership, like with X, Twitter, whatever you call it, can change those platforms, significantly. And so there is risk there. We have absolutely no control over Google, who own YouTube. We've got no control over their preferences. We have no control over their community guidelines or anything. So yeah, that is without question a risk, but it's one of those things, isn't it? You have to use the tools that you have. We don't really have a choice or a better way of doing that. All we do know is that change is constant. We know the platforms come and go. And I'm sure if YouTube was ever to fall to pieces, there'd be something to step into its place.
We have another question over there. Oh, actually there. Sorry. Can't see behind the light. This there.
Hi, thank you. To follow up on that, Nick, you got your museum engaged in commercialisation. Some museums are obviously struggling with this. There's been the whole conversation for many years about advertising on web pages, etc., etc. Can you talk us through how the conversation went about commercialisation in your organisation and what you would advise others to guide their conversations?
Thanks. Sorry, I can't see you because of the light. I know you're there. I think actually a large part of it is to do with the language perhaps that's being used. So it's interesting you use the word commercialisation. Actually, I see this as fundraising because, of course, we're a charity. So all of our commercial activity is ultimately there to support the charitable objectives of the Tank Museum. So a big part of getting people on side, I think, is making sure you're using words which don't make them feel uncomfortable. And I think there is a bit of a resistance to the idea of commercialisation in museums. And, I can kind of understand why to an extent. But I think we're also an organisation of a size where, you know, it means that some of those kind of more kind of fundamental questions can be a lot easier to address because, you know, we all sit around the same sort of senior leadership table and we can have these conversations. And I think we've been very lucky in the sense that I think the organisation as a whole has appreciated what we've been trying to do in order to bring more money in order that we can reinvest that into the collections. And that's really what it's all about. I hope that answers the question, does it? Cool, thank you.
Super. And I have a question from the online audiences, and it's for you, Joe. And it's always interesting conversations about when things like this come up. And with such a huge and constant output on Mused, how do you deal with IP and permissions?
Yeah, good question. So we have licensed imaging platforms, and I've actually reached out as well directly to companies. For instance, I did which Mario Kart driver are you? And I reached out to Nintendo, and their marketing team was really helpful. We were able to use those images because it's editorial use. So generally, it's not been an issue. We do sometimes have issues with images that have expired on our licensed platforms. For instance, all of our Incredible Hulk images had to be taken down, gutted. But yeah, we are constantly monitoring that, and we work with our legal team in-house as well to make sure that we're not doing anything naughty. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
Do I have another audience question from there? Someone?
Hello, thank you. That's very loud. It was actually a question inspired by you, Joe, but I think I can open it out to everyone here, which is often when we're making things in museums, it's not necessarily the users that we're kind of worried about or we're thinking about, it's our colleagues. And I was just wondering how much kind of pushback you were getting from colleagues or how much how much engagement you were getting from colleagues across the various V&As and other institutions that you're working with.
Well, maybe if each of you take it in turn to kind of answer that one, because it's an interesting question. Who'd like to go first?
Yes, I think the thinking was around Muse. It was a crazy idea. Yeah, but thankfully it's been proven wrong. Yes, it is a lot of internal PR, and the way that we've managed that is to obviously support the collections, but we've also supported like in-house innovations, like with the Young V&A. They do workshops with kids, so we've been able to support them via Mused and, you know, use it as a sort of marketing platform for their initiatives as well. And, you know, we're having fun with the content, and I think, you know, a lot of people appreciate that, especially as everybody knows that we have to shift our focus audience-wise and start bringing in younger people. So, yeah, it's been challenging, but not as challenging as I thought, because it's fun.
And Eva, if I can pass it over to you about dealing with collaboration with teams.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there will always be pushback of some kind. There will always be resistance to change, particularly if you want to change the way you work or if you want to sort of really make a big organizational shift. I think the thing that works for me, except for some of the tips that I've shared, is also just reminding stakeholders at the start of every meeting, this is the mission, these are the goals, these are the problems that we are trying to solve, and just making sure that all the conversations are sort of going back to those three pillars, and also taking stakeholders on a journey with you. You know, a lot of people sort of come up with resistance because they don't necessarily understand something, but if you sort of take them with you, maybe you can involve them in some of the user testing sessions, sort of take them on a journey with you, it does make a difference. And when people feel involved and invested, they're much more likely to open up.
Super. And then any other points before we move on to the next question from Nick?
I think for Science in the Making, we were really lucky compared to maybe some of our projects where we already had a really engaged stakeholders because they'd already been running a pilot. So people were really invested in digitising the archives. And the main risk and the thing that people were worried about was that like it wouldn't be good and it wouldn't do everything they needed it to. Because in that situation, they are kind of part of the academic community. They're sort of so close to the end users as well. There was much less resistance as long as we made sure that we actually delivered the things that we knew were needed. Because I totally understand, we work with a lot of museums and often there's a lot of internal wrangling and features that just can't get through, or content that just can't get through because the curators don't like it, or they don't agree, because you'll have different departments who don't quite, see things the same way or share processes with each other. So there's a lot of stakeholder management that needs to happen. I'm trying to involve people in as many design meetings, because what it looks like is always the thing that people are most interested in. The things that are making them feel engaged, and like Eva said, taking them on the journey with you as much as possible, but then trying not to get frustrated when sometimes you just can't get things through. The features that tend to make it through are the ones that actually curators go, oh, this is really useful for me as well. I like it.
Lovely. Nick, I'm going to ask you another question from our online audiences now. And can you say something about how much you've discussed the ethics of your online presence? Do you have rules about what kind of advertising can become attached to your videos, or how much to permit user tracking?
That's a very good question. Again, where we're using third-party platforms, we have to accept, because we take advertising revenue from Google, but we also understand that Google has pretty strong rules with regards to who is allowed to advertise on their platform. In fact, I was talking to someone about this the other day. I actually think the risks are far greater for the advertiser and the content that they're associated than it is the other way around. However, the controls you do have mean that, for example, we can select whether or not we accept advertising from certain brands, gambling and alcohol being the key ones that we do not allow on our particular platforms. But I think this is one of those things where I think, potentially some industries like the museum industry can be a little bit guilty of navel gazing. The perfect is always going to be the enemy of the good. And ultimately, our objective has to be to get out to the widest number of people in order that we can better satisfy our charitable objectives. And it's never going to be 100% perfect in the way that we're able to do that. Just that.
Yeah, fair enough. Is there any other questions from people here? I have more online ones. Ooh, from down the front over there.
Hello, this is a sort of joint question for Nick and Lou. I was quite interested in the parallels in your talks about essentially subject specialists. One is, I guess, academic, and one are perhaps non-academic, perhaps a mixture of both, but also separating those out from general public, which has the danger of also implying that the general public have general interest. But people aren't born nerds. They're not born subject specialists. At some point, there is a conversion. So how do the interface between your two audiences, where is the interface? Where are the opportunities to sort of take that general public and start to create those kind of moments of inspiration or whatever it is that's going to feed your specialist audience?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And actually for us, one of the things that drove our decision to put much more effort into the core academic audience was thinking actually to make science more accessible for a general public audience and to think about growing and inspiring scientists of tomorrow. One of the things that we really needed to do is make life easier for the scientists of today. So actually making the whole digital platform, making it easy to access the materials that people needed, breaks down some of the barriers to actually entering and belonging in that community. But the features, like I showed, about the kind of partially curated search and having an area where you can publish about topics and themes that have more of a general interest to sort of draw people into the subjects was really important, and just not making it feel like the academic resources that many of us would have used when we were studying, which are so database looking, and if you weren't interested in the subject, you would never even bother using it. And that is where actually making something that's fun and enjoyable and nice to use comes into play, because even someone who has no prior knowledge might be oh, I wonder what this does. And what you want to do is spark their interest, because it was a big deal for us to make sure that we did that when you happen upon this website, you're not just oh, this is disgusting and it's got nothing for me. Not what you want.
So I think from our perspective, I suppose we might create a subject enthusiast by somebody who's visited the Tank Museum perhaps as a child, perhaps that kindles an interest, But that's not the only way. I think people find interests from a range of different things in society, whether that's video games, movies, books, studies at school, and that kind of thing. So what we rely on is the power of the YouTube algorithm to help put our content in front of people who have already expressed some kind of interest in the subject matter by virtue of the other content that they've watched or the things that they've searched for. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, there is a disconnect otherwise.
All right, thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm going to have to call into the questions there. There are a few more questions that were online, so apologies if people put questions on Slido, but please do keep using it as we go throughout the day. And we're just about to break for lunch, but before I do, I'd just like to say lunch will be served outside. Now, at 12:45, it's going to be the AGM for the Museum Computer Group, which I know everyone really wants to come to. But we really would like it if people could, if they want to grab some lunch and then you've got half an hour, then come back inside. The Museum Computer Group, we are a community made up of people who are giving our time to put on events like this and also look after the JISC mail list that we all use. And it's really great if you can get sharing help and people come along to help us organise. And we are recruiting for members, as we always are. So, yes, please do that. And so then it just remains to me just to thank our guests. Thank you to Eva, who's joining us remotely. Thank you to Joe, Nick, and Lou for the fascinating talks. And I hope everyone enjoys their day. And lunch is now ready for people if you'd like to make your way outside. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for that. That was good.